भारत के श्रम कानूनों में एक बड़े बदलाव की बात हो रही है, सामाजिक सुरक्षा संहिता 2020। आखिर ये है क्या और क्यों इतनी चर्चा में है?
हाँ, ये काफी महत्वपूर्ण बदलाव है।
आज हम इसी पर थोड़ा गहराई से बात करेंगे। हमारे पास देखिए सरकारी नोटिफिकेशंस हैं, कुछ लीगल एनालिसिस हैं, कमिटी रिपोर्ट्स भी हैं। जी कोशिश रहेगी कि इनसे जो खास बातें हैं वो निकल कर सामने रखें। तो चलिए शुरू करते हैं।
बिल्कुल।
सबसे पहले ये संहिता है क्या चीज? मतलब कोई एकदम नया कानून है ये?
नहीं, एकदम नया नहीं कह सकते। ये असल में आप कह सकती हैं नया और पुराना दोनों का मिश्रण है। इसने ना 9 पुराने सामाजिक सुरक्षा कानूनों को एक साथ मिला दिया है।
9 कानून?
जी।
कौन कौन से? जैसे कि?
हाँ, जैसे आपका पीएफ हो गया, ESI, ग्रेचुइटी, मैटरनिटी बेनिफिट, एम्प्लॉय कॉम्पेंसेशन, ये सब इन 9 को मिलाकर अब ये एक कोड बन गया है।
अच्छा, 9 को एक में मिला दिया। तो इसका मकसद क्या था? सिर्फ कानूनों को कम करना?
नहीं, सिर्फ वो नहीं। एक मकसद तो है कि कानून थोड़े सरल हो, उनका पालन आसान हो, पर उससे भी बड़ा मकसद है सामाजिक सुरक्षा का दायरा बढ़ाना।
दायरा बढ़ाना मतलब
ये कि जो संगठित क्षेत्र के कर्मचारी हैं उन्हें तो कवर करना ही है, पर साथ में, और ये खास बात है, असंगठित क्षेत्र के मजदूरों को और गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स को भी इसके दायरे में लाना है।
गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स मतलब जैसे ये ऐप आधारित डिलीवरी वाले, टैक्सी ड्राइवर्स, ये तो बहुत बड़ी बात है।
बिल्कुल, ये आज की जरूरत भी है। जिस तरह काम का तरीका बदल रहा है। वैसे संहिता 2020 में पास तो हो गई थी, पर एक मजेदार बात यह है कि अभी ये पूरी तरह लागू नहीं हुई है। केंद्र और राज्य सरकारें दोनों को इसके तहत अभी रूल्स बनाने हैं। वो जब बनेंगे तब ये जमीन पर उतरेगी।
अच्छा, तो मतलब कानून बन गया है पर नियम बनने बाकी हैं। ठीक है, तो ये कवरेज का विस्तार तो समझ आया। इन गिग वर्कर्स के लिए क्या खास सोचा गया है? सुना है कोई अलग फंड वगैरह की बात है?
हाँ, ये बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है। इनके लिए एक अलग सामाजिक सुरक्षा कोष यानी सोशल सिक्योरिटी फंड बनाने का प्रस्ताव है।
एक अलग फंड?
जी, केंद्र सरकार इसके लिए स्कीम्स बनाएगी। अब सवाल है पैसा कहाँ से आएगा? तो इसके लिए केंद्र सरकार, राज्य सरकारें या फिर ये जो वर्कर्स हैं या इनकी कंपनियां हैं वो योगदान दे सकती हैं। यहाँ तक कि CSR फंड का भी इस्तेमाल हो सकता है।
इतने सारे स्रोत, ये थोड़ा पेचीदा नहीं हो जाएगा? और क्या ये पैसा वाकई उन तक पहुंचेगा?
देखिए, चुनौती तो होगी फंडिंग का सिस्टम बनाना, और ये पक्का करना कि लाभ सही लोगों तक पहुंचे ये आसान नहीं होगा। पर इरादा यही है कि इकोनॉमी का ये जो नया बड़ा हिस्सा है उसे भी कुछ सुरक्षा मिले।
सही बात है। अच्छा, और वो जो फिक्स टर्म कर्मचारी होते हैं उनके बारे में क्या है?
हाँ, उनके लिए भी सोचा गया है। जो लोग मतलब एक तय समय के लिए कॉन्ट्रैक्ट पर काम करते हैं,
हाँ,
उन्हें भी अब स्थायी कर्मचारियों की तरह ही सामाजिक सुरक्षा लाभ मिलेंगे, जैसे ग्रेचुइटी, पर एक फर्क के साथ।
क्या फर्क?
उन्हें ग्रेचुइटी उनकी सर्विस की अवधि के अनुपात में मिलेगी, मतलब प्रो राटा बेसिस पे, चाहे उन्होंने वो पारंपरिक 5 साल पूरे किए हों या नहीं।
अच्छा, ये तो अच्छा कदम है। मतलब अगर किसी ने 2 साल भी काम किया फिक्स टर्म पर तो उसे उस हिसाब से ग्रेचुइटी मिलेगी।
बिल्कुल, जबकि रेगुलर कर्मचारियों के लिए वो 5 साल की शर्त अभी भी है। और हाँ, ग्रेचुइटी का पैसा 30 दिन में देना होगा, नहीं तो ब्याज लगेगा।
ठीक है, और जो मौजूदा लाभ हैं जैसे मातृत्व लाभ, उसमें कोई बदलाव?
मैटरनिटी बेनिफिट्स की अवधि वही है 26 हफ्ते। बस एक क्लॉज है कि अगर किसी महिला के पहले से 2 जीवित बच्चे हैं तो फिर ये अवधि 12 हफ्ते होगी।
समझ गया। अच्छा, एक और चीज थोड़ी अलग लगी, ये इंस्पेक्टर कम फैसिलिटेटर, ये क्या है? पुराने लेबर इंस्पेक्टर से अलग कैसे है?
हाँ, ये नाम बदला है और सोच बदलने की भी कोशिश है। पहले इंस्पेक्टर का रोल ज्यादातर गलतियां पकड़ने और सजा देने वाला माना जाता था, है ना?
हाँ, बिल्कुल।
अब कोशिश है कि ये भूमिका थोड़ी सलाहकार जैसी भी हो, मतलब नियोक्ताओं और कर्मचारियों को नियम समझने और पालन करने में मदद करना। इसीलिए फैसिलिटेटर शब्द जोड़ा है। और पूरी प्रक्रिया को वेब आधारित ट्रांसपेरेंट बनाने का भी इरादा है।
मतलब थोड़ी नरमी, मदद पर जोर।
हाँ, मदद पर जोर है। लेकिन अगर कोई नियम माने ही नहीं तो फिर नरमी नहीं।
अच्छा।
जुर्माने बहुत कड़े कर दिए गए हैं।
अच्छा, कितने?
पहली बार अगर नियम तोड़ा तो 50,000 से 1 लाख तक का जुर्माना, और अगर दोबारा वही गलती की तो जेल भी हो सकती है और जुर्माना 2 लाख तक जा सकता है। तो बैलेंस है, मदद भी और सख्ती भी।
ठीक है। एक और बात, आधार का इस्तेमाल सुनने में आया है कि अब बेनिफिट लेने या रजिस्टर करने के लिए आधार जरूरी होगा।
हाँ, ये भी एक बड़ा पॉइंट है। आधार को अनिवार्य बनाने का मुख्य कारण है पोर्टेबिलिटी।
पोर्टेबिलिटी
मतलब ये कि अगर कोई मजदूर मान लीजिए बिहार से महाराष्ट्र काम करने जाता है तो उसका पीएफ, ईएसआई या दूसरे बेनिफिट्स रुके नहीं, वो अपने आधार नंबर से कहीं भी उन्हें एक्सेस कर सके। इससे रजिस्ट्रेशन भी आसान होगा और डुप्लीकेशन रुकेगा।
अच्छा, तो ये एक तरह से पूरे देश के लिए एक सिंगल सिस्टम बनाने की कोशिश है?
बिल्कुल, ताकि वर्कर कहीं भी जाए उसका सोशल सिक्योरिटी कवर उसके साथ रहे।
तो कुल मिलाकर देखें तो ये संहिता में क्षमता तो है कि वो भारत में सामाजिक सुरक्षा का पूरा नजारा बदल दे, खासकर उन लोगों के लिए जो अब तक इससे बाहर थे।
निश्चित रूप से इरादा तो बहुत अच्छा है, एक यूनिफाइड, सरल और ज्यादा लोगों को कवर करने वाला सिस्टम, पर जैसा हमने कहा असली चुनौती इसके लागू होने में है।
हाँ, वो तो है। राज्यों को नियम बनाने हैं, फंडिंग का इंतजाम देखना है
और जमीनी स्तर पर ये काम करे ये पक्का करना है, क्योंकि श्रम जो है वो संविधान की समवर्ती सूची में आता है। तो केंद्र और राज्यों का तालमेल बहुत जरूरी होगा।
सही कहा। तो लबुलु अब ये है कि सामाजिक सुरक्षा संहिता 2020 एक बड़ा महत्वाकांक्षी कदम है। कानूनों को सिंप्लीफाई करना और कवरेज बढ़ाना, खास तौर पर गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स तक, ये इसके मुख्य लक्ष्य लगते हैं।
हाँ, ये भविष्य को ध्यान में रखकर बनाया गया कानून लगता है, पर चुनौतियां भी उतनी ही बड़ी हैं। खासकर हमारे देश में असंगठित क्षेत्र इतना विशाल और अलग-अलग तरह का है। उन तक योजनाओं को पहुंचाना और ये पक्का करना कि फायदा सच में मिले, ये देखना होगा।
बिल्कुल। और जाते जाते हमारे श्रोताओं के लिए एक सवाल छोड़ जाते हैं। क्या ये नई एकीकृत आधार आधारित प्रणाली सच में भारत के करोड़ों अनौपचारिक मजदूरों को वो मजबूत सामाजिक सुरक्षा दे पाएगी जिसकी उन्हें जरूरत है, या फिर इसे लागू करने की जो मुश्किलें हैं, जो जमीनी हकीकतें हैं, वो इसके अच्छे इरादों पर भारी पड़ जाएंगी? सोचने वाली बात है।
Welcome to the deep dive. We've got quite a stack of material today. We're diving deep into a major piece of legislation. You know, the kind of law that really touches millions of people, millions of businesses, defines those sort of fundamental safety nets of employment.
Absolutely. And this isn't just like a dry legal document we're talking about. It's really about practical protections.
Right.
You know, health, income security, retirement planning, things that underpin work for a huge segment of the population in India.
Exactly. And the sources you share, they give us a real shortcut to understanding this. We're looking at the code on Social Security 2020.
Yep.
We've got bits from the code itself, highlights, analyses, and even some really interesting commentary on how it's being implemented, or, well, the process behind it.
Yeah, and our mission in this deep dive is really to cut through that complexity for you. We'll be pulling out the most important nuggets, like what's actually new, who gets covered, what it means day to day, so you get the clear picture without having to, you know, slog through dense legal text yourself.
Right. Think of this deep dive as your essential briefing on this pretty significant legal reform. Okay, let's unpack this. So, starting right at the core, what exactly is the code on Social Security 2020?
Well, think of it basically as a major consolidation and an update.
Consolidation.
Yeah, the sources explain it rolls together, get this, 9 different existing laws on Social Security, all into a single piece of legislation in India.
9 laws. Wow.
The aim is, you know, simplification, streamlining things.
9 into 1. It certainly sounds like it would simplify things.
It does, conceptually, and this is one of the most crucial points right up front from the sources.
Okay.
While the code was passed, got presidential assent back in September 2020, its key provisions, they're not actually in effect yet.
Okay, hold on. So it's been technically law since 2020, but it's not operating.
Precisely. Because the central and state governments, they still need to frame and notify all the specific rules and schemes. You know, the detailed stuff needed to make the code actually work on the ground. The framework's there, but the nuts and bolts, the mechanics, they're still pending.
That's a really important distinction for anyone trying to figure out its impact right now. Enacted, yes, but implementation is waiting on those details.
Yes, exactly. And that context is critical as we dive into what the code intends to do.
Right. Okay, so looking at what it intends, one of the big things in the sources is how it aims to broaden that Social Security net. Who is this code trying to bring in?
Well, this is where the code attempts a really significant expansion, because before this, the sources, they highlight a pretty stark reality for workers outside the, traditional formal sector.
What do they say? What was the reality?
They point out that under the old law, the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act of 2008, even though it was around for over a decade, only about 6% of unorganized workers were ever actually covered.
6%, just 6.
6%, yeah. The sources suggest this was down to things like, no properly empowered bodies to implement it, not enough funding, issues like that.
Wow, 6%. That figure really hammers home the scale of the challenge the new code's facing. So how does the 2020 code try to, fix that? Reach more people?
It specifically includes provisions for unorganized workers, sure, but crucially, it explicitly brings in definitions and mechanisms for gig workers and platform workers.
Okay. Gig and platform workers.
Exactly. Groups that have, largely been outside the formal Social Security setup until now.
That feels like a pretty major acknowledgement of how work itself is changing, doesn't it?
It really does.
So how does it propose to cover them? What's the plan?
Well, the code outlines registration processes for all three groups, unorganized, gig, and platform workers. But more importantly, it actually mandates that central and state governments set up specific schemes just for their welfare.
And what kind of welfare are we talking about?
The schemes could cover quite a range, things like life and disability insurance, health benefits, old age protection, education, housing, even employment injury benefits. And the sources also mention potential funding ideas, contributions from workers and employers or platforms, possibly even CSR funds, corporate social responsibility.
That does sound like a potentially huge step for these groups.
Yeah.
What about workers who are sort of more structured, but maybe not permanent? Like fixed-term employees.
A code addresses them too, yeah. It explicitly states that fixed-term employees are eligible for all the benefits that permanent employees get.
All of them?
Yes, but the key thing is it's proportionate to their service, period.
Okay. Pro rata.
Exactly. And their hours, wages, allowances, benefits, none of that can be less than what a permanent employee gets for doing similar work.
That seems like a basic principle of fairness, really. Equal work, equal benefits, even if the contract's fixed.
Pretty much. The sources also mention provisions for interstate migrant workers.
Oh, interesting. What about them?
Well, the government might commission studies on their conditions, create specific schemes just for them. There's even mention of a potential rule requiring employers to pay an annual travel allowance for them to go back home.
And construction workers, they often have specific risks. Are they still covered specifically?
Yes, definitely. The code keeps that focus on construction workers. It maintains provisions for their welfare boards and dedicated funds, partly paid for by assess.
Okay, so the code really does widen the net in terms of who is covered. Now we know the types of workers. Let's unpack what protections and benefits are actually laid out in these sources.
Right. So the code brings together rules for several major Social Security benefits. The sources go into detail on things like gratuity, employee state insurance, that's ESI, Provident Fund or EPF, employee compensation for injuries, and maternity benefits.
Gratuity. That's a big one. Many employees kind of understand that one. How does the code handle gratuity?
Okay, so the code details the process. The employee, and this includes fixed-term employees with that pro rata eligibility we mentioned, they make a written application.
Right.
The employer then gets 15 days to check the claim, let the employee know the amount, and then they must pay it within 30 days of getting that application.
And if they miss that 30-day deadline?
Then the employer owes simple interest on the delayed amount. Oh, and another big change the sources highlight. Private sector employers now have to get insurance to cover their gratuity liability. Unless they're a government body, of course.
Insurance for gratuity.
Yeah.
That's definitely new. Aimed at making sure the money's actually there, I suppose. What about employee state insurance, ESI?
Right, ESI. It provides, medical care and cash benefits if you're sick, pregnant, or injured at work. The code sets out contributions from both the employer and the employee at rates that will be prescribed later.
And the ESI fund pays for?
Various things. Sickness benefits, maternity benefits, disablement benefits, temporary and permanent, medical treatment, payments to dependents if someone dies from a work injury, and funeral expenses too.
Medical treatment sounds like a really core part of ESI.
It absolutely is. The ESIC, the corporation, can provide treatment directly or it can partner up with state governments, local authorities, even private providers to run ESI hospitals.
Okay.
Oh, and the sources also clarify, you generally can't get multiple benefits for the same period. Like if you qualify for both sickness pay and temporary disablement pay, you usually have to pick one.
Okay, makes sense. No double dipping. So that's ESI. What about Provident Fund? EPF.
The code covers PF too, yes.
Yeah.
Though it lists quite a few exemptions like small cooperatives or government bodies that have their own similar schemes already.
Right.
An interesting bit, though, is that bigger companies, say with 100 or more employees, might be allowed to manage their own PF account.
Oh, really? Self-management?
Potentially, yeah. If they get authorization and meet certain conditions, like the majority of employees have to agree, and the company can't have defaulted on payments in the last 3 years.
That adds a potential layer for larger businesses. Still under strict rules, though.
Yeah.
And employee compensation for injuries at work.
Yes, the code covers compensation for employment injuries and also for occupational diseases.
Occupational diseases, like...
The sources actually list some specific ones. Things caused by exposure to, say, arsenic or radioactive substances. And compensation is payable even if the employee broke a rule when the accident happened, as long as they were doing something for the employer's business.
Right. And medical costs.
Employers have to reimburse medical expenses for work injuries, too.
And what if it's a really severe injury? Or, God forbid, worse?
Well, for permanent disablement, there's a medical board that assesses how much earning capacity has been lost. That decides the compensation amount. And if an injury leads to death, the employer has to deposit the compensation plus a minimum amount for funeral costs. At least 15,000 rupees or more if the state government sets a higher figure.
Okay. And maternity benefits, also really crucial. What does the code say there?
It's pretty detailed. It actually prohibits employing a woman for 6 weeks right after delivery, miscarriage, or a medical termination of pregnancy.
And eligibility.
To get the benefit, a woman needs to have worked at least 80 days in the 12 months before her expected delivery date.
Okay, 80 days. And how long is the benefit for?
The maximum period is 26 weeks. Though there are slightly different rules if a woman already has 2 or more children, then it's 12 weeks.
Right.
There are also rules about breaks for nursing. And an interesting point from the sources, you lose the benefit for any day you actually work for pay while you're claiming it.
Okay, that's a very comprehensive look at the different benefit types. Now, who's actually in charge of making sure all this happens? How is compliance checked?
Well, the code sets up various bodies, Social Security organizations, boards, like the National Social Security Board, state boards.
Who's on these boards?
They're meant to have representatives from government, workers, employers, civil society too. Their job is advising, monitoring schemes, managing the funds. The government can even step in and take over a board if it's not doing its job properly.
Okay. And what about boots on the ground, actually checking businesses?
That's where the inspector-cum-facilitators come in.
The Vector.com-facilitator. Sounds like a dual role.
Exactly. The name suggests it. Part of their role is advisory, helping employers and employees understand the rules. But they also conduct inspections.
How do those inspections work?
The code lays out a system, including things like web-based selection, random checks. They have powers to, examine people, demand information, search premises, seize relevant documents like registers.
So not just giving advice, but actual enforcement power too.
Definitely. But a key point the sources highlight is that usually, before they start prosecuting someone for an offense, the inspector-cum-facilitator has to give the employer a written warning first. A chance to comply within a set time.
So a comply first, punish later kind of approach.
For first-time offenses, yes, that seems to be the idea. However, that chance to comply, it's not given if it's a repeat violation of the same kind within 3 years of the first one.
Okay, so they get one chance, basically. After that, no more warnings for the same thing.
Exactly. So there are consequences for ignoring directions or being a repeat offender.
That certainly seems to up the stakes. What are the actual penalties if employers don't pay their dues or break other rules?
The code has processes for assessing and recovering money owed, but crucially, the sources are clear. It introduces enhanced and much stricter penalties compared to the old laws.
Stricter how?
Well, for general violations, fines can be like 50,000 to 100,000 rupees. But for more serious stuff or repeated offenses, especially failing to pay contributions or cess or benefits like gratuity or maternity pay, penalties can include jail time, up to 2 years, plus hefty fines.
Jail time? Wow.
And specifically for failing to pay dues, if it's a second or subsequent time, the penalty can be imprisonment for up to 5 years and a fine of 3 lakh rupees.
5 years jail and a big fine for repeatedly not paying. That definitely sends a strong message about compliance, We also saw something about Aadhaar being required.
Yes, that's in there too. The code says employees, unorganized workers, and others need to use their Aadhaar number to establish their identity and their family's identity.
For what purpose?
For things like registering for schemes, claiming benefits, whether cash or medical help, accessing services, getting payments. The sources also mention this is seen as the way to make benefits portable if workers move between states.
Ah, okay. So Aadhaar becomes the link to your benefits wherever you are. Makes sense for portability.
Exactly. Now, stepping back and looking across all these sources, there's a really interesting observation that keeps coming up. It was even noted by a parliamentary standing committee that reviewed the code.
Okay. What's that key observation?
It's how often phrases like as may be specified, or as may be prescribed, or as may be framed appear throughout the entire code. We kind of saw that as we talked about different bits.
Right, I remember hearing that.
Yeah.
Prescribed rates, specified time. What does that tell us? What's the implication?
It tells us that while the code sets out the big picture, the broad framework, the intention, a lot of the actual substance.
Like the specific details.
Exactly. The precise entitlements, the exact contribution amounts, how the schemes will actually work, all that is left to the rules and schemes that the central and state government still need to create and notify later.
Oh, okay. So the code is like the skeleton, but the actual muscles and tendons, the things that make it move, those are still being developed in separate rules.
That's a great way to put it. It gives flexibility, sure, but it also means the full practical picture for both workers and employers. It just isn't completely clear yet, not until those detailed regulations are out and the code is actually brought into force.
That feels like a really critical piece of understanding the current situation with this law. It connects right back to what you said at the start and acted, but implementation pending those rules.
It absolutely is fundamental to understanding where things stand right now. And, the sources also give us some interesting background on the legislative journey itself.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like how different drafts were circulated, the feedback they got. For instance, trade unions apparently objected strongly at first because earlier drafts didn't include established bodies like the EPFO and ESIC.
Really? They wanted to keep those.
Yeah, they pushed hard for universal social security through those existing well-known structures rather than completely new ones, perhaps.
Huh. That history really shows the kind of push and pull that goes into making such a huge law, doesn't it? Different ideas about the best way to achieve universal coverage.
It really does. And then, on the flip side of all that complexity for workers, the sources also point to a major stated goal from the government's side: simplifying compliance for employers.
Right. How much simpler is it meant to be?
Well, there's a comparison mentioned. Under the old system, with all those fragmented laws, employers might have had to keep track of over 10 different registers and file maybe 4 different returns.
10 registers, 4 returns. Sounds like a lot of paperwork.
Exactly. The stated aim under the new code: just 2 registers and 1 single annual return.
Whoa. From 10 and 4 down to 2 and 1. That sounds, well, for employers listening, that's got to be a major aha moment, potentially huge reduction in admin burden.
If it's implemented effectively, yes, it could indeed be a significant simplification for businesses trying to navigate all these different Social Security requirements.
So let's bring this deep dive back to you, our listener. Thinking about everything we've just unpacked, what does it all mean for you?
Well, whether you're an employee trying to, get a handle on what your Social Security rights might look like in the future, or maybe you're an employer bracing for compliance changes, or even if you're just curious about how India is trying to modernize its labor safety nets, this code on Social Security is a really important development to keep an eye on.
It definitely signals a clear intent, doesn't it? To expand coverage to workers in the kind of newer parts of the economy, gig workers, platform workers, and also to formalize benefits like gratuity for people on fixed-term contracts.
Absolutely. And while, as we've stressed, the full practical impact depends on those future rules. Understanding the basic structure, the kinds of benefits being talked about, the plan administration, the enforcement, and especially those tougher penalties, that's all crucial for staying informed and getting prepared.
Yeah.
This deep dive, really, it's designed to give you that essential starting point.
And there you have it, our deep dive into the Code on Social Security 2020, based on the sources you shared. We've tried to unpack its purpose, highlighted who it aims to cover, explored those key benefit areas it consolidates, and looked at how compliance is supposed to work.
And just to reiterate one last time, Remember, while it's enacted, the code's full implementation is still pending those crucial detailed rules from the central and state governments. So the landscape is definitely going to keep evolving as those get finalized.
It's definitely a complex, far-reaching law, but hopefully we've managed to pull out some valuable, maybe even actionable insights for you from this material.
And maybe just one final thought to leave you with to ponder. Given this code's really ambitious goal, consolidating, universalizing Social Security, but also its heavy reliance on future, still-to-be-written rules for all the specifics, how do you think that balance between the grand vision and all those pending details might actually play out? How might it shape the real-world experience of Social Security for millions once it's finally fully operational? Something to think about as we watch this unfold.
That's a great question to end on. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this deep dive.